As of late, I've been revisiting the Splinter Cell franchise out of nostalgia. Splinter Cell is one of my favorite franchises in all of gaming. It got me into the stealth genre back when I was a teenager, and over a decade later, I'm still hooked on stealth games, and it's all thanks to Splinter Cell being my gateway into the genre. As a result, I felt compelled to make a video covering at least one of the Splinter Cell games. When I started planning this video, I was trying to decide between two games I was the most interested in talking about: Splinter Cell Chaos Theory and Splinter Cell Conviction. Ultimately, I decided to go with Splinter Cell Conviction for one reason. It is the most controversial game in the entire franchise, and therefore I thought it would be the most intriguing to talk about. Conviction is a very polarizing game. On one hand, you have people who absolutely love this game because of how much of a badass power fantasy it is, where on the other hand, there is an abundance of veteran Splinter Cell fans who were completely alienated by how wildly different Conviction is to the original Splinter Cell games. Whereas the original games were slow, methodical, and tactical, Conviction is fast-paced, aggressive, and wrathful. The original has felt grounded, realistic, whereas Conviction throws all that realism out of the window in favor of turning you into an action hero. The abrupt and sudden change in direction was jarring for many longtime fans who found the franchise's new direction difficult to accept. But at the same time, there were also many people who enjoyed this new direction, this new take on the series, and became fans because of Conviction. 15 years after the launch of Splinter Cell Conviction, it still remains a very controversial and polarizing game. But what are my thoughts on Conviction? What are my thoughts on not just the franchise's sudden change in tone at the time, but also on the game's legacy all these years later? Well, let's find out as we dive into the story of Splinter Cell Conviction, its development, its impact on the fanbase, and its overall legacy. Before we continue with the video, I'd just like to say that my debut science fiction novel is out now, link in the description below. Splinter Cell Conviction was released in 2010, developed by Ubisoft, Montreal. It is the sequel to Splinter Cell Double Agent, set 3 years after the events of that game where Sam Fisher is now a rogue agent on the run, trying to track down his daughter's killer.
Who are you working for? Sam Fisher, you know, is dead. The man who played by the rules, listened to the voice in his ear, he's gone.
The version of the game we know today is actually not the original version we were going to get. The original build of this game was scrapped due to backlash and an overall negative reception, but a lot of people still really liked this version of the game, and personally, I also think what was shown off was kind of cool despite not feeling at all like a Splinter Cell game. There were a lot of really interesting ideas for the build of Conviction, and it would have been great if the original build was turned into its own IP, much like how the first Devil May Cry game was originally going to be Resident Evil 4. I really liked how in this original build, Sam had to rely on the environment and improvised weapons in order to survive, because he no longer had access to his original high-tech gadgets seen in previous games. This build also introduced new stealth elements seen in other games such as Assassin's Creed and Hitman, where Sam could blend into crowds, and I also remember seeing in one of the previews that you could fire guns to draw attention to a specific area as a form of distraction. But anyway, even though this build had a lot of cool ideas, it was still received pretty negatively, especially during internal playtests. So, development in the game was rebooted, and Ubisoft decided to dramatically pivot the game's direction. This new version of Conviction would prioritize a more linear experience, while also focusing on streamlining the gameplay, improving the cinematic presentation, and overall creating a much more visceral, fast-paced experience. However, Conviction's new direction stirred up controversy. Controversy that still persists to this very day.
What happens next is up to you.
Long story short, Conviction shifted the franchise in a direction that longtime fans neither expected or wanted. From the original Splinter Cell game all the way through to Double Agent, the franchise placed a heavy emphasis on slow, methodical, tactical gameplay. These games were perceived as very hardcore and difficult, with intricate gameplay mechanics that made it daunting for non-stealth game enthusiasts. Ubisoft wanted Splinter Cell to become more accessible, open to a wider audience, hence why they worked to shift the franchise into a direction that was less hardcore, less of an acquired taste. This obviously alienated most Splinter Cell fans who fell in love with this franchise because of its unforgiving, punishing, yet rewarding gameplay. So, if Conviction is nothing like previous games, then how does it differentiate itself? What is the gameplay style of Conviction? And just in case you were wondering, yes, I did film this shot just so I could show off that I own a Splinter Cell Karambit. Isn't it dope as fuck? In previous games, you were more of a ghost, infiltrating areas to obtain valuable intel while leaving no evidence that you were even there to begin with. Sure, you might have to take out a few enemies here and there, or grab someone to interrogate them for information, but for the most part, the older games rewarded you for avoiding enemies rather than directly engaging with them. Conviction, on the other hand, is significantly more aggressive. You're not avoiding enemies, avoiding conflict. Instead, you're a predator stalking their prey from the shadows before striking out at them and vanishing back into the shadows. On top of that, the game is significantly more action-packed than previous entries. There's still some stealth elements in Conviction, sure, but they're very surface level, and Conviction still forces a few action set pieces on you from time to time. Ubisoft was heavily inspired by movies and shows such as 24 and The Bourne Identity when crafting Conviction, and this is abundantly clear when you're playing the game. Conviction is significantly more cinematic in comparison to the older games. It literally feels like you're playing through an interactive action movie, and the game places a heavy emphasis on cultivating the power fantasy of a badass action hero. For example, the takedowns in this game are very well done. The animations and sound design for them is really good. You have 3 types of takedowns: unarmed, handgun, and rifle. If your gun is holstered, you will take out the enemy with hand-to-hand combat. If you're holding a handgun or rifle, on the other hand, you will use it as an improvised bludgeoning tool. These hand-to-hand takedowns are so excellent because they feel punchy, crunchy, weighty, gritty, and satisfying to pull off. Speaking of hand-to-hand combat, another way that this game amplifies the power fantasy of making you feel like a badass is through the interactive interrogation sections of the game.
Looking for me, asshole? No more playing around. Who sent you? You!
Throughout the story, you will have to interrogate specific targets for information to uncover your next objective, and being a rogue secret agent on the run, you don't have many tools at your disposal, so you have to resort to using the environment to your advantage. I think it's kind of a cool idea to have these interactive interrogation sections where everything in the environment can be interacted with and you get to choose how you want to utilize the environment to get information out of your targets. You could argue that it's not very Splinter Cell-like, especially in comparison to interrogations in the previous games, which were significantly tamer and sometimes played for laughs.
I knew it! I knew there were ninjas here!
What?
Yeah, you must be a ninja. How else could you sneak up and grab me like that?
Listen, I don't know what...
Wow! I can't believe it! A real, live ninja!
Listen, I'm gonna kill you if...
Wow! Killed by a ninja! Cool!
Normally, I would agree with the sentiment that Conviction's interrogations aren't appropriate for Splinter Cell, but considering the overall context of the story, where Sam is grief-stricken and angry over his daughter's death, I feel like it makes sense from a narrative standpoint for the interrogations to feel this brutal. But while these violent interrogations make sense for the story this game is trying to tell, I feel like they were significantly more unnecessary in this game's successor, Splinter Cell Blacklist, where in that story, Sam doesn't have a good reason to be as unnecessarily violent and angry as he is in that game. But that's a topic for another day. Let's get back to talking about Conviction. So, the game further emphasizes the power fantasy of an action hero in two other notable ways. The first being Sam's ninja-like ability, and how he's capable of navigating the environment with incredible speed. He can scale walls and buildings in a matter of seconds, fold over obstacles in his way, jump from high places, and overall turn any environment he's in into a literal playground. This doesn't make any goddamn sense whatsoever when you take into consideration the fact that Sam is an old man in his 50s, but I'll admit it does feel very cool to be playing a character this agile. And finally, you have the one gameplay mechanic that is unanimously hated by the Splinter Cell community, yet beloved outside of the fanbase, the mark and execute system. The way the system works is that whenever you take down an enemy with hand-to-hand combat, you get the ability to mark and execute your enemies. You can mark up to 2, 3, or 4 enemies depending on what sort of gun you're using, and then when you press a certain button, Sam will automatically headshot all of the enemies you marked. Out of all the gameplay mechanics I've discussed so far, this is the one that emphasizes the power fantasy the most, and also a huge reason why a lot of people say that playing Conviction and Blacklist makes you feel like John Wick. Anyway, you can probably see now why I've been saying over and over again that a lot of Splinter Cell fans don't like Conviction. The franchise started off as this realistic geopolitical thriller where you play as a spy who feels somewhat grounded in the real world, whereas with Conviction, you feel like Jason Bourne on steroids. You either love this or you hate it. Maybe you are someone who really enjoys Conviction for what it is, maybe you strongly dislike it. Either way, people tend to have very strong feelings about this game as a result. But now that we've discussed the gameplay and Conviction's differences to the original games, let's briefly discuss the story of both the main campaigns and the co-op campaign. There's not a whole lot I want to discuss regarding this topic, but here are a few things that I feel like are worth mentioning. I feel like the older Splinter Cell games felt more grounded in the geopolitics of the real world, whereas in Conviction, and by extension Blacklist, those games feel more like Hollywood action films. On one hand, I personally feel like it's really cool to play a game that feels like an interactive action film, but on the other, I feel like this was too drastic of a change for the franchise compared to the original games. Conviction's story is a huge part of the reason why this game doesn't truly feel like Splinter Cell. However, as much as I miss the realistic feel to the stories of the original games, for the sake of this video, I would choose to discuss the story for Conviction as if it were its own thing in isolation in order to give it a fair chance to stand on its two legs without constantly comparing it to its predecessors. Let's start off with my positive opinions on Conviction's story before we dive into the negatives. The story to this game starts out very strong. It opens with so much intrigue, starting off with a flash forward at the White House where Grimm betrays Sam, shooting him in the shoulder, before we cut to a scene of Victor Cost being interrogated by the private military company Black Arrow, while he gives a dramatic monologue about what happened to Sam Fisher after the events of Double Agent and where his mental state is currently at right now.
The thing you have to understand is this. The Sam Fisher you knew is dead. America killed him, asked him to Make one sacrifice too many, cross one line too far. A drunk driver killed him, some anonymous asshole who ran down his daughter and vanished. She was the one thing in his life that humanized him. And his agency killed him. It set him up, turned him loose, and told him to pull the trigger on his best friend in a dirty New York City basement. Irving Lambert died by Sam's hand that day. And so did Sam.
This is honestly a pretty engaging monologue, a very gripping monologue. I really like how this sets the tone for what's to come in this darker entry of the franchise. The flash forward with Grimm combined with Victor's monologue does a pretty decent job setting up the story for this game, making you feel invested, intrigued. This leads us into the first two levels of the game, which in my opinion are very strong, enhancing the story's sense of intrigue as Sam hunts down his daughter's killer, only to be reunited with Grimm, who helps him for reasons unknown.
Sam,
Who is this? How'd you find me?
give me a little credit, Sam. Don't tell me you don't recognize my voice even after all this time.
Grim, what do you want?
To save your life. We can go from there. A team of armed men just entered the marketplace looking for you. They're closing in on your position. Unless you do exactly what I say, this will be a very short conversation.
I'm not doing a damn thing until you tell me how you found me.
We're third echelon. We've got an eye on everyone.
We also have, in my opinion at least, a really cool idea for a tutorial where throughout the first level we get flashbacks to Sam's daughter, Sarah, back when she was a child. Sarah is afraid of the dark because there might be monsters and therefore she can't go to sleep, so Sam has to console her by teaching her why monsters should be fearing her if she's in the dark with them. This scene between Sam and Sarah is written in a way where it teaches you, the gamer, how to use Conviction's stealth mechanics to eliminate enemies.
When it's light, you can't see into a place that's dark. But when it's dark, you can see what's around you much better.
Really?
Really. So if there's monsters or bad people around, you can see them. And if you're in the dark, they can't see you.
I can't see you either. Can you please turn the light back on?
This tutorial is great because it teaches you how to play the game while simultaneously giving us a glimpse into the relationship between Sam and Sarah. I really love this because it's a tutorial that's seamlessly integrated into the story, and instead of bringing the game to a screeching halt like most tutorials, it maintains the game's sense of flow and progresses the narrative a little bit.
Now take a look at your mobile. You can see it really well, right? If there were monsters standing underneath it, because I can see it, maybe I could make it fall on them and they'd go
And
away.
it would fall on their heads and they wouldn't be bad anymore?
That's my girl.
Another reason why the opening of this game, and the first two levels by extension, are so strong is due to Conviction's unique visual presentation. Words are projected onto different surfaces throughout the game's world, instructing you what to do and where to go, which is a very cool and unique way of showing the player their objectives. Whenever you're interrogating enemies in this game, such as Dimitri in the first level, video clips will be projected onto the walls surrounding you in order to visualize the information you're being given.
It's Coben. Andrei Coben. Runs drugs, guns. Anything people want, he gets it for them.
Not good enough. Why does Coben want me dead?
Conviction's visual presentation remains stellar and unique throughout the rest of the game, and it's probably one of my favorite aspects about it. However, as intriguing as the beginning of Conviction's story is, eventually it kinda goes off the rails, becoming more and more convoluted and cliche as the game progresses, and this is where we get into my negative opinions on the game's story. Say what you will about how Conviction's story isn't as grounded or realistic as the original games, at least the beginning of Conviction is very solid from a narrative standpoint. The story becomes significantly weaker as it goes on, becoming over the top and melodramatic before eventually evolving into something far bigger than it probably should have been upon introducing what I can only describe as an Illuminati-level conspiracy into the mix. The main antagonist of Conviction is a mole working inside of Third Echelon who has turned Third Echelon into a corrupt organization in an attempt to try and assassinate the president. However, there is a greater evil at large in Conviction who are influencing events from behind the scenes, a secret organization named Megiddo who are literally the Illuminati.
Megiddo. Who are they?
They're the ones who run this town. In Moscow and Beijing and any other place that matters. They're the ones who are going to get me out of this in one piece. And once Reed is finished at the White... It's all Reed now.
Damn it.
Officer in trouble!
Sam, what's happening?
Galliard's dead. The shooter's running.
Not only does this make the story and the world of Splinter Cell as a whole feel very unbelievable, but the Megiddo subplot is just completely dropped in future Tom Clancy games moving forward. It feels like Megiddo didn't even need to be a part of this game, especially if they are never mentioned ever again. There was a comic book that came with the collector's edition of Splinter Cell Blacklist that mentions Megiddo by name, but to my knowledge, that's literally it. Megiddo as a plot element was just completely dropped moving forward. Megiddo isn't the only reason why I feel like the story gets weaker as it goes along. The game just overall starts to feel even more over the top and unbelievable the further it progresses. It's not like the story of Conviction is unbearable or anything, it just feels very implausible. Nevertheless, I will say that even if the story gets weaker the further it progresses, the game's presentation remains perfect all throughout, and therefore the story is still kind of entertaining, even if it is completely far-fetched. Now that we're done discussing the main storyline, let's discuss the game's secondary storyline. The co-op campaign. Nope, there he goes. I was hoping that I would get to have a cute cat in the video for just at least 2 more seconds, but oh well. Anyway, I have a lot of fond memories of playing this co-op campaign with my cousin back when we were teenagers, and the co-op campaign is definitely one of the best parts of Conviction, if not one of the most memorable aspects of this game. The co-op campaign is a prequel to Sam's story, based around 2 characters, Archer from Third Echelon and Kestrel from Voron. For lack of a better comparison, Voron agents are basically the Russian equivalent of Splinter Cells. Archer and Kestrel are both really enjoyable characters, but out of those 2, the standout is definitely Kestrel. Kestrel is my second favorite Splinter Cell character, with Sam Fisher obviously being my first favorite. Everything about Kestrel is just so goddamn cool. He has a deep, intimidating, and badass voice. His stealth suit looks rugged and unique compared to your typical Splinter Cell. His goggles glow red instead of green. He has a badass arm sleeve tattoo. Everything about Kestrel is just incredibly cool. I still really like Archer as well though. He definitely has the cooler stealth suit that feels more in line with what you would normally expect from a Splinter Cell character, while also having this snarky demeanor that contrasts Kestrel's professional no-nonsense attitude. But Kestrel still resonates with me the most out of the 2. Anyway, so the co-op campaign serves the role of providing additional context for some of the events that unfold in the main campaign, as both Archer and Kestrel work together to recover 4 warheads that were stolen by Andrei Kobin in order to prevent an international crisis. This campaign offers a nice change of pace compared to the main game, where you're playing as actual Splinter Cells on a covert mission instead of a rogue agent on the run like Sam Fisher. It's a lot of fun overall, but I think my favorite part about the co-op campaign is the ending. The ending is a plot twist that you, the players, never see coming. You're both ordered to kill each other by your respective organizations. I love this. It's such a cool idea to have a co-op campaign where the final boss fight is not just some random NPC, but instead it's your co-op partner. The co-op campaign has two different endings depending on which player wins, both of which are obviously quite sad and tragic, especially because the game does such a good job of endearing both Archer and Kestrel to you. So to see one or the other die depending on which player wins is very bittersweet. The canon ending is that Kestrel won the fight, and he even appears later on in Splinter Cell Blacklist, where in the final level of Blacklist's co-op campaign, you find Kestrel's comatose body. There was going to be a DLC for Blacklist based around Kestrel that was unfortunately cancelled, but you can find audio files online for this scrap DLC where Kestrel wakes up and talks with Sam. Ever since Blacklist, Kestrel has only shown up in spin-off Splinter Cell media. For example, he appeared as a playable character in the now cancelled mobile game Tom Clancy's Elite Squad, where for some reason they gave him green goggles instead of red. But his most notable appearance outside of the games is in the spin-off novels, where he was eventually killed off, which is absolutely infuriating. It's frustrating knowing that such a cool character with an abundance of potential moving forward was tossed to the side and killed off in a book that most Splinter Cell fans probably haven't even read. But anyway, the co-op campaign in Splinter Cell Conviction is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what is undoubtedly Splinter Cell Conviction's best aspect, actually the best part about Splinter Cell Conviction as a whole: the Deniable Ops game mode. Deniable Ops is the sole reason why I still return to Conviction from time to time. Hell, even fans who dislike Conviction still have appreciation for this game mode. I don't think I've ever seen anybody say anything negative about Deniable Ops. The premise of Deniable Ops is simple. You're dropped into a map with 5 different sections to it. In each section there are 10 guards each. You have to stealthily kill all 10 guards in one area in order to progress to the next, and once you eliminate all of the guards in the final area, you win the game. However, if you get detected at any point, then 10 more guards will show up as reinforcements that you also have to kill. Deniable Ops is a really fun, bite-sized stealth experience. It's a very enjoyable game mode for whenever you have like 10 or 20 minutes to burn. You can play Deniable Ops either solo or co-op with a friend, and this game mode goes a long way to add more replayability to an otherwise linear game. There's also a few other variations in Deniable Ops. One of them is called Infiltration, which is basically the same as regular Deniable Ops, except there are a bunch of security cameras, lasers, and if you get detected once, then you have to start from the beginning of the round all over again. You also have Last Stand, where basically you have to protect an EMP device against waves of enemies. And finally, you have Face Off, which is basically just PvP between 2 players. I would recommend Conviction just for the Deniable Ops mode, actually. It's a lot of fun. Blacklist has a similar game mode, but unfortunately it's not as good as Conviction's, especially because Blacklist's version of the game mode only has 2 rounds instead of 5. Anyway, now that we've discussed the ways in which Conviction differs from the original games, the approach Ubisoft decided to take when developing the game, and the storyline, let's move on to discussing the reception. What did everybody think about Splinter Cell Conviction? Critically speaking, Conviction was received positively. Most critics loved the game, the cinematic presentation, the gameplay, the ways in which it reinvented the franchise, and just overall enjoyed this fresh yet different take on Sam Fisher's adventures. There were some criticisms, however, as critics disliked how short the story was, and some even disliked how the stealth elements in Conviction were very surface level in comparison to the older games. However, Conviction had a more polarizing reception amongst longtime fans of Splinter Cell and stealth game enthusiasts as a whole, for reasons that I think I've already made clear enough in this video. To this day, the Splinter Cell fanbase is still divided on Conviction. I personally still see so much hate and disdain for Conviction on the internet all these years later, with so many fans saying that Conviction was the first nail in the coffin that marked the death of this franchise. But at the same time, I still see a lot of love for this game too, and you know what? I personally really like Conviction. Does Conviction feel like a Splinter Cell game? Absolutely not, but it's still an incredibly fun time and incredibly strong power fantasy, and over a decade later, I still go back to Conviction from time to time just to play Deniable Ops. It feels like I'm one of the only Splinter Cell fans on the planet who actually likes all of the games in the franchise. Hell, I even had a little bit of enjoyment out of Splinter Cell Essentials. I always go back to the older games in the franchise whenever I'm in the mood for a slow-paced, methodical stealth experience with intricate gameplay mechanics, whereas with Conviction and Blacklist, I go back to those games whenever I'm in the mood for a stealth game that's significantly faster paced and makes me feel like a badass hunter stalking his prey from the shadows. I know, saying that I'm a fan of all the Splinter Cell games, regardless of their differences, is probably a really boring answer for me to give. But it's the truth. I'm always going to love stealth games, even if they aren't as popular as they used to be, and each Splinter Cell game scratches all the different itches I have for different types of stealth experiences. So, critics were favourable towards this game, whereas the fans were extremely divided. But what was the legacy of Splinter Cell Conviction? What significance does Conviction hold in the grander context of the games industry? Conviction kind of laid the groundwork for the blending of both the action and stealth genres that we see in a lot of games today. We don't usually get true stealth experiences anymore, but we do get a lot of action games that incorporate faster-paced stealth elements similar to the ones in Conviction. It also popularized certain gameplay elements that we've seen in a lot of games since, such as marking enemies to track them, the ability to see a last known position, and also fluid combat systems. Some examples of games that were influenced by Conviction in these sorts of ways are Hitman Absolution, Deus Ex Human Revolution, Ghost Recon Future Soldier, and Ghost Recon Wildlands, Far Cry, Shadow of Mordor, and Metal Gear Solid 5. However, while Conviction paved the way for more fast-paced stealth experiences, its legacy is still a very troubled one because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people consider this game to be the beginning of the end for the franchise. Conviction was such a drastic, jarring shift that a lot of people argued that it led to not just an identity crisis for Splinter Cell, but also led to the franchise's current state of dormancy. The successor to Conviction, Splinter Cell Blacklist, failed to meet sales expectations, and when the franchise was shelved along with all of Blacklist's planned DLC, we haven't gotten a new Splinter Cell game since Blacklist. This used to make me incredibly sad and somewhat angry at Ubisoft, but nowadays, I feel like the Splinter Cell franchise dying with Blacklist was for the best, because as of the making of this video, Ubisoft is in shambles and they've ruined so many of their other franchises over the years. So yeah, it sucks that we never got another Splinter Cell game after Blacklist, but personally, I don't even trust Ubisoft with Splinter Cell anymore after seeing what they've done with some of their other franchises, so I'm kind of glad that Splinter Cell underwent a quick death, instead of the slow, painful, humiliating deaths that a lot of Ubisoft's other franchises have been experiencing. However, it's not like we've received absolutely no Splinter Cell content whatsoever over the years. We might not have received a new game, but if you're watching this video and have made it this far through, then clearly you have an interest in Splinter Cell and are probably already aware of the fact that not only have we gotten more spin-off novels, as I mentioned earlier, but we've also gotten Splinter Cell content in other Ubisoft games. Sam Fisher has gone on to appear as a supporting character in other Ubisoft titles, most notably Ghost Recon Wildlands, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and Rainbow Six Siege. I don't play Rainbow Six Siege, so I don't have any opinions on Sam Fisher in that game, but I personally loved seeing Sam Fisher in Ghost Recon and how they added a whole bunch of Splinter Cell themed cosmetics to Wildlands and Breakpoint. It's not uncommon for me to boot up Breakpoint or Wildlands every now and then just to roleplay as a Splinter Cell and infiltrate different bases all across the open worlds of those two games. We're also getting an animated Netflix series based on Splinter Cell. Personally, I'm open to it. It has the potential to be really cool if they pull it off. I hope the series is good, reignites interest in the franchise, and gets new people interested in playing the games. We've even gotten Sam Fisher as a character in another Netflix series, Captain Laserhawk. And Captain Laserhawk's take on Sam Fisher is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen, while simultaneously being one of the most badass things I've ever seen. Sam is a double amputee in this universe, with goddamn laser guns in place of his legs, and like, despite not having any legs, he can still kill multiple people at once. It's so batshit insane, yet so much fun. And finally, I know that I said we haven't gotten a new Splinter Cell game since Blacklist, and that the franchise has kind of been dead ever since, but apparently Ubisoft is developing a remake of the first Splinter Cell game. Like I said previously, I don't really trust Ubisoft with Splinter Cell anymore, but I'm not the kind of person who likes to go into anything expecting to hate it, or judging something too harshly before it comes out. So, as much as I don't really trust Ubisoft whatsoever, I still really want this remake to be good, and I really want Ubisoft to prove me wrong, to show me that they can still be trusted with this franchise, after all. So, I wish the developers working on the remake the best of luck. I really want them to succeed, despite how cynical and jaded I feel towards the way Ubisoft functions as a company. But anyway, no matter what happens to this franchise moving forward, I'm just glad that I got the chance to enjoy these games while I had the chance. I was always really interested in spy films growing up, and all the Splinter Cell games did a great job of providing me the fantasy of being this experienced, hardened spy going on covert missions. The Splinter Cell franchise might not be in an ideal state right now, but I'm grateful that these games had the chance to exist, and that I got the chance to experience them. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. Despite how much of a fan I am of the original games, I do quite enjoy Conviction a lot. It's not an ideal Splinter Cell game, but it's certainly a very entertaining game. It's the black sheep of the franchise that a lot of fans find easy to hate, but standing on its own, Conviction definitely has some merits to it. Although a game such as this probably would have been better off as its own franchise, considering all the weight and expectation that comes from the Splinter Cell name. And if we ever get a new Splinter Cell game, whether it's the remake or a brand new entry, I do hope that the franchise returns to its roots, as the original gameplay mechanics and its many intricacies are sorely missed. Also, a little off topic, but if you want to play a game that feels somewhat similar to the older Splinter Cell games, I would highly recommend the indie game No Sun to Worship. It's the only other stealth game I can think of besides the original games that incorporate gameplay elements such as a light and darkness meter, or a sound meter, or the ability to fine-tune how slow or fast your crouch walking, etc. Anyway, I leave it to you. What are your thoughts on Conviction? Do you love it, hate it, or are you somewhere in between? Whatever you think, feel free to let me know in the comments below and like the video. If you're interested in seeing more from me, I cover a lot of movies, shows, video games, and other pop culture that I enjoy on this channel, so if that sounds like content you'd enjoy, feel free to subscribe. I'm also an author, so if you're interested in reading something new, whether or not it may be sci-fi, fantasy, etc., then feel free to check out my work. Links in the description below. But with all that being said, thank you so much for checking out my video, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next one.